Okay, so we've got the other side of our pants, the other leg, and we're again looking at the out seam matching the out seam that we already pinned. And what we're going to do is make sure the side that we pinned and chopped is all nice and flat. And we're going to take the out seam from the other side and bring it over to mirror right on top of that, of the original. And one of the things we want to match up is the pocket at the top along with the waistband, because then we know we're evenly setting it directly on top of the markings we've already made, so that we can just transfer those markings to match this side. Okay, perfect. So now, this is not an exact science, but it is the most efficient way to do this. We're gonna just peek underneath at where our pins sit underneath. And we can make the marks. See, we're holding these two seam allowances, the edge of the pants together, and then we are lifting it up and making that mark right where it is on the pant underneath. And just going right down the line, always making sure that these edges match up so that we're not taking in too much of one side and not enough of the other. There's our line right there, just so that we can see it. Okay. And we're going to taper that all the way down through the hem. So one important piece is that the hem has to be let down. You have to release the hem when you're tapering a pant, because you're not going to shoot that seam back out and get a weird flare at the bottom of the leg. You definitely have to be able to taper it equally and then put the hem back in. So typically that means letting it down. All right. Okay, great. So now we're ready to sew. So we're going to come on over here to our machine. It doesn't matter if we start at the top or the bottom. We're just going to pick a side and start sewing. Oopsies. So I'm going to start at the bottom, at the hem of this leg. I'm just going to move that seam allowance out of the way. Make sure that the pant legs match up with one another. They should already, but just make sure that they do. And then we're going to obviously sew right up that line that we made, making sure that we are sewing on the correct line, the final line we decided on. And we just want to make sure that our sewing is continuous. So we don't want to start and stop and back stitch in the middle of the seam. We want to make it nice and smooth. Taking out the pins as we go, looking forward to make sure we're going in a smooth line. And you'll notice that we're starting to get closer to that side seam the further that we come up. Perfect. All right. And then just lining it up. So we want to make sure that we run our stitching over top of their original stitching when we match those seams up, so that we don't get any issues with the seam coming undone where we aren't stitching above that, closer to the waistband. Okay, now we are ready to press and release the original seam. Now there are two ways that you can go about this. Many pants have a different stitching, which is called a chain stitch. And that allows us to pick a few seams, just like we would normally, either from one side or down the middle of the seam, being careful not to tear our fabric. That would be obviously the traditional way to seam rip. But with a chain stitch, we can take this seam apart a lot faster by cutting a few stitches on this side that looks like regular stitching, and then going to the other side that has this bulkier looking stitching and just pulling on those seams that we released. And these chain stitches will go one way or the other. So if when you pull, it does not begin to release, you know you want to go to the other end of whatever seam you're working on. So see how that's not pulling? Come up here to the other side where we ended our seam, and let's cut a few stitches there and see if it will pull the other way. See, we're trying to pull up from the bottom, and now we're going to see if it will let us pull down. A few more stitches we're going to cut. See if it will let us do that.